So what makes Microsoft so consistently out of sync with consumer tech? Bad incentives, too many resources, plain old company DNA. Ben, I'm curious whether you have any thoughts on this one. I mean, you've experienced a number of these failed Microsoft experiments in real time.
Well, I think to go to the Xbox One specifically, there's lots of products where it's easy to have the fantasy view of it without getting into the reality of it. And the
Mm-hmm.
problem with the Xbox, whichever one it was back then, Xbox 360 or whatever, it's hard to keep track, is it was a gaming console, and there's not that many people who want to drop $400 or $500 on a gaming console. It was a way in that sort of made sense in theory, but like the actual details matter. And so, yes, this idea of being the one box or having a device on your desk, a device on your TV, the cloud, or through whatever the Steve Ballmer vision sort of was, the details do actually matter. And if your
as far as
prerequisite
details, you sit in a conference room and say, all right, how many people out there are really willing to pay $500 for a video game console if we're targeting non-gamers, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, when you start Xbox, it's like, yes, there are people who buy consoles. That's a way into this market. It's also a ceiling on your market opportunity. You're not going to have a product that reaches everyone if you're also trying to serve, what is this, hashtag gamers rise up, who want super high end graphics and all those bits and pieces. Why people have to make a hashtag because they're grumpy about Microsoft not paying sufficient attention to them. So that's the problem. As and where is that tactics? Is that strategy? I think it's just bad strategy. You're not actually thinking through like where you will get there. Now, arguably today, you could do that with gaming in the cloud, and that could be one of the offerings for this sort of service. And so maybe Microsoft will keep at it. There's lots of things that happen as if you just sort of never give up, and Microsoft is good at doing that. There's also the bit, though, he asked about DNA. Microsoft's just bad at consumer tech. They've always been bad at consumer tech. And I think this was you could also get in trouble by not understanding your strengths or your history. Microsoft had a huge consumer business, which was people buying Windows PCs. That was an accident of them dominating the enterprise and having those scale advantages we talked about with tech. They got scale by serving the enterprise, getting developers running applications, and people went home and got the same computer they had at work, and they could use some of the same applications. They could, whatever it might be. That was downstream of there being these scalable aspects that do pay off. But just because Microsoft had a large consumer business via Windows doesn't mean they were a good consumer products company. And Apple was the opposite. They were always better at consumer and bad at enterprise. And interestingly, and perhaps in part because the consumer market is larger, when it came to, say, phones, Apple was able to go in the opposite direction. And they had this phone business that was focused on consumer, but they had people in the company. By the way, I think this is where our old friend Scott Forstall comes in, that very early on in iOS, they started building in enterprise support for device management. And I think even like the first version or second version had like Exchange support and all these bits and pieces that go into it. And they got sufficiently good enough where, despite Apple still not being an enterprise company, they put enough hooks in so that people could use the phones that they wanted to use and plug into an enterprise environment. And then they had the same ecosystem take over where there wasn't viable to come up with an enterprise phone independent of the consumer phone. Developers don't want to build applications for both. Windows Phone was dead on arrival for lots of reasons. And they took the market in that direction. Again, these leverage aspects we're talking about are so strong and massive, they overcome Apple not being an enterprise company, or in the case of Windows back in the day, Windows not being a consumer company. What Microsoft should have realized is we're not a consumer company, and maybe we're not so good at this space, just as Apple probably should realize we're not an enterprise company.
Is that why they tried to push this through Xbox One? Because the Xbox line was like the one area where they were succeeding in consumer tech? Because
were they succeeding? I mean, that's the whole thing. I've always been very critical of Xbox. I think just because I think the fundamental vision was flawed. And so Microsoft ended up building this division and spending a lot of money for it. To what strategic end? I didn't really understand how this benefited.
Cool.
That was the main payoff from my perspective. And like, even when I was at Microsoft, like, Microsoft was sort of at something of a nadir, I think, when I was there, around 2010, 2011 or 2012. Everyone loved to point to Xbox. Oh, we have that over there, and they had the coolest part of campus and cool buildings and things like that.
That's the thing, is if we're talking success here, the bar is relatively low. This is the company
this
that
gets
gave
back
us
into
the Zune,
like
the
where I'm
Surface,
sympathetic to
Windows
shareholders
phones.
saying like, look, can you guys just give us the money you're making? It's our money. Instead of just spending it thinking you're good at something that you're not, when you're the managers, you're not the owners. This is like, again, tech companies are just a textbook case of the misalignment of incentives that can happen between shareholders and managers. And I would argue the entire existence of Xbox is a great example of that.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because not until you laid out like the ceiling that was inherent to the Xbox One, if it wanted to be the device that unifies all your different feeds in one place and integrates it all. Like if it's $500 for an Xbox One and you're pitching that to a bunch of adults and saying, this is a great product, this can unify everything, it could be this one interface that makes it easy for you. My first question, if someone gave me a product like that, would be like, can I pay $300 less without the video game functionality?
Right.
Like,
Yep.
I don't really care about video games. I don't need that. So it does make sense.
It is interesting historically how this developed. Like, this was a much bigger thing when I started Structure. I wrote something like Black Box Strategy or something like that, like talking about the different approaches to it. And number one, it is interesting that no one's really won this space. Number two, the company that's done the best is Amazon, which has done the cheap devices and really leaning into the storefront, and they make a lot of money. Like Apple TV Plus is now on Amazon channels, and apparently that's driven the most growth that the service has had, because Amazon's good at selling stuff and people are used to that interface. So now Apple gets to pay 30% to Amazon for Apple TV Plus, which is very funny. But the other thing was this rise of connected TVs. And a lot of people just use the apps on their TV as crappy as they are, because the point of value, the point of integration turned out to not be like the operating system. There's not just the attraction of consoles, and you can see why Microsoft wanted to go there, is they were an operating system company, and they realized you have long-term defensibility and sustainability by having the developers on your platform. And where are all the developers who want to put stuff on TV? They're game developers, because that is a use case on the TV. What else is there? Are there productivity apps on the TV? No, there's like 10 streaming apps that you need to get. And those streaming companies, because they have the similar tech economics leverage model where they're spending money on content, so they want to get it available everywhere, they will go to the effort of writing a app on the crappy like Samsung TV, whatever it is. They'll make it work just because that gives them access to that many more customers, over which they can gain leverage on the cost that they did to create this content. And so because the point of leverage or the point that mattered was the expenditure on the content, and the motivation, that's what people wanted, was access to the content, and the motivation is to spread that everywhere. It ended up being the case that the interface and where the apps live was a total commodity. So yeah, we'll get apps on the Samsung TV and on the Sony TV and on the TCI or whatever, TCL, and we'll put it on Apple TV. We'll put it on. So
basically, though, like Xbox One 12 years ago, there was a chance that maybe there was so much adoption early on that it dominated.
I don't think there was any chance. I was against it from the beginning for this exact reason. But I can understand why Microsoft, being an operating system company, is like, okay, where's the point in this chain where we could actually get leverage and own this space? And the only
way that it could have worked is 12 years ago, because today nobody would ever go to hardware.
No, it couldn't work 12 years ago. That's the thing. So yeah, the point of integration in this is just not at the. So number one, it was not going to work with consoles for the reason I said. It's a limited market, and your device is going to be too expensive. So that's why I was always against the Xbox angle. It didn't make sense to me. It wasn't going to get the scale that Microsoft wanted. Number two, where I think was mistaken, was I was caring about the black box market. Is it going to be Fire Stick? Is it going to be the Chromecast?
Right.
Is it going to be Apple TV? That also did not matter, so fair credit to Microsoft. They got it wrong. I'm saying I wasn't thinking through this either. The point of integration that mattered was there is no point of integration. That's why it's a fairly, it's like whoever makes the content will go to the work to make their apps available. The content available everywhere. Netflix is the one who figured this out. They were building Roku internally to have a Netflix box, and they realized actually this is bad because we need to get our content everywhere. As soon as you're selling a device, you're limiting your market to whoever buys your device. Mm-hmm. And we're disincentivizing other people to put our app on their devices because they're going to perceive we're competing with them. We're not competing with them. So we need to actually get out of this market entirely. So they spun out Roku, and Roku is its own business, which in some respects is competitive with Netflix. They have their own like free streaming fast service, but it was the right thing to do. And Netflix is very good at this. They got the structure right. And so they were the first ones to I think figure this out. Amazon, I think, is the other one that has done well in this regard. And I think Google has an interesting opportunity here. I still am going to write about this at some point, but just having the linear TV is handy. So
yeah, well, and I think what I was referring to with like 12 or 13 years ago, I'm definitely not standing out for the potential of the Xbox One, but it is that black box alternate timeline where if like one had dominated 12 or 13 years ago, maybe the shape of all of this looks different. But if you try to do it today,
how would you dominate? Right, you need something that is differentiable so that you get one black box over the other.
Yeah.
And again, that's why you could, I can
like
see why
Apple
Microsoft
TV
went for
remote.
a console. Yeah. You are, again, well, there's a zag for you.
No, I'm kidding.